Essentially, this is a guide to the main seizure devices that are currently available. So I'll just move on to the next slide here. And so the aim of this presentation tonight is really to give you an overview of the main seizure detection devices currently on the market. I would say that choosing a device is really a very individual decision. There's many factors to consider, and we'll look at those. But it's important to also say that Epilepsy Ireland can't recommend which product is best for individual use, but we make the information available to assist with making that choice. And any of the images that are used in the presentation relating to any of the devices where it's not stated, they're all from the public websites of the alarm companies or suppliers, so they're used only for education and information purposes. So just to outline some of the concerns about seizures that would give rise to the queries about seizure detection and the interest in seizure detection. And really, the concerns that people would have would be, for instance, in relation to prolonged seizures and the risk of status epilepticus, which is prolonged seizures. SUDEP, sudden death in epilepsy, and the concerns and risks in regard to that. Hospitalization risk of injury, stress and anxiety of living with unpredictable seizures, sleep deprivation due to seizures or concern around seizures, the impact on family members, and also we know that seizures can be a barrier to independence as well. So these are some of the many reasons why people might be considering using a seizure detection device. And who might use those and where might they use them? Well, really anybody with seizures that are detectable by alarms could use a seizure detection device. Also, people with sleep seizures, people who live alone or are parenting alone, anxious families, parents who are sleep deprived because they're listening out during the night, maybe for signs and sounds of seizures. People with uncontrolled tonic-clonic seizures in particular, people with prolonged seizures, those with a history of injuries and hospitalizations, people who might wish to live independently of their family and want to look at safety and risk reduction. And in the settings where seizure detection devices can be used, well, it can be any setting where the person is normally staying or living. That can be in the home, in care homes, boarding schools, colleges, and so on. And the context that they might be used in, typically it's either in sleep or in waking, and for some people it can be in both. In sleep, we'll be looking at bed sensors, cameras, and wearables. They're the options for sleep detection. And in waking and outside of the home, really it comes down to the watch type wearables. They would be what would be relevant to anybody having waking seizures or needing detection outside the home. We're often asked if all seizures are detectable, all types of seizures, and the answer is no. Currently, not all seizures are detectable with the technology that's available. Tonic-clonic seizures are the most detectable of seizures, and most of the devices that are on the market will detect tonic-clonic seizures. So there are other features, detectable features of some seizures, which include repeated or major movements or falls. So quite big movements. And also the presence of urine, saliva, vomit, sounds, changes in breathing, exit, meaning somebody leaves the bed or leaves the chair. Also pulse rate. Those are all features that lend themselves to being detected with the technology that's currently available. Also, absences. There's one device that can potentially detect absences as well. However, there are other seizures that may be more subtle and hard to detect, and those would be focal seizures, which used to be called partial, either simple or complex partial. And unless there are, say, more overt signs such as movement or some other detectable feature to those seizures, then they would be difficult to detect and wouldn't really be picked up by most of the technology that's currently available. So with regard to questions that come up about seizure devices versus other types of alarms that people might be more familiar with, I suppose the focus and the reason behind this presentation and the focus on seizure devices is because they are designed for that specific purpose, for detecting and alerting seizures. They have two main functions, and that is to detect and to alert. And for detection, it relies on detecting movements, electrodermal, which is skin conductivity, so electrical currents in the skin, and other physiological features, and those can include breathing changes or other physiological changes during the seizure. Also, the alerting can be by bell, by text, or by call. So those would be the key components of a seizure detection device. Now, the other alarms that people might be familiar with, we're not going to be going into those in any great detail because we are focusing on the seizure devices. But other alarms, they're not always specific to seizures. They may detect some seizure signs like falls, exit, breathing, urine, pulse, or some other features. But again, they wouldn't necessarily be specifically for detection of seizures. Pendant and button alarms, those types of personal alarms, they actually require a warning, and they require a reliable warning in order for the person to be able to press a button to summon assistance. And those can be useful for people who have reliable auras or warnings, but for people who don't, they wouldn't really have a value. Baby alarms, they pick up sounds, but the listener needs to actually detect the seizure sounds, so they need to be able to recognize and identify those, and out of all the other sounds that it might pick up. So they're not seizure specific as such. Home cameras, again, similarly, they capture a video record, but they wouldn't necessarily, for instance, alert to an event. So it might be the fact that there is a recording, but not necessarily a way of communicating an event that requires intervention. So, and finally, health bio trackers. There's been a real explosion in this market. Lots of devices for tracking your health biodata of many types of these devices are available now. And what we could say in relation to those is that really they're not specific to seizures. The data may not necessarily relate to seizures, but for some people, they may feel that there are certain indications that are individual to them that those devices might pick up. But in general, it's they're not considered medical devices. So when choosing a device, it's useful to look at a checklist. And so we have this checklist here, maybe to act as a prompt to consider, where is it needed? Is it needed at home? Will the person need it in bed, or will they need it outdoors, or maybe in both those situations, in sleep or in waking? Does it need to be portable? Does it need to be wearable, or can it be in a fixed place? If the person only has seizures in sleep, maybe that's, all they need to consider is whether they need something that can be in a fixed place in their room. If they need something to detect during waking, they're going to have to look at wearable options as well. What mobiles is the device compatible with? Every device has its own profile in relation to that. So that's another consideration. What's the detection range and the radius? By that we mean, what is the detection of seizures? What kind of seizures does this device detect? Does it detect only one type, like tonic-clonic, or does it detect more than that? And what is the radius as well? Because in regard to devices, you could be looking at, in some instances, maybe 20 or 30 meters around the house, and general area, and for others it'll operate outside of the home. And would GPS be required if somebody had a seizure in a public place, for instance? Would it be important to be able to locate that person if you got an alert? So those are features that the devices may have, and having a checklist to know what it is that you're looking for and what would be useful and what you might need. Does it alert by auto dial, text, or bell? Which is preferable, which is needed? You might only need alerting within the home in some instances. If there's somebody there to respond, it may not need to dial outside to a phone. But again, every set of circumstances is different, and if somebody's living alone, they'll need a mechanism for the alarm to communicate with somebody outside of their home. So would the person require a monitoring service? Not many people might necessarily look into this unless they have a specific need. But a monitoring service would be where there isn't necessarily somebody on hand to respond, and the monitoring service would receive the call instead, and then they would try to communicate with the person to establish if they need assistance, and if they don't get a response, then they would link in with the emergency services. So that would be the role of monitoring. And so that question comes up then: who will respond when the person has an alert on their alarm or seizure detection device? Is there somebody nearby? Because they do need to be nearby in order to respond, a family member or a trusted key holder who will be able to respond promptly. Does the supplier offer technical backup, or does the family need some level of know-how to set up this device? And so people will have their own preferences in relation to that. And some devices, require people to set them up themselves. And so, that's often worked out very well for a lot of people. But then there are companies that will supply technical backup for the devices that they distribute here in this country as well. So how will the alarm work in a power outage? What's the battery life? Some of these alarms have battery life up to a year. So, there can be those concerns, but again, finding out what happens in that situation and what the battery life is. Costs are obviously a big consideration, and there's a huge range of costs. Entry level for alarms, very basic alarms, can be around the €200 mark, and you can go upwards of above 1,700. So that would kind of be the top of the range of costs. But there are free trials available with some of the companies as well, so they're worth considering getting a free trial and finding out if the alarm suits you and if it's going to work in your situation. Sometimes there are subscriptions as well, because often there are apps that make the device work and they require a subscription package. And then there are potentially rental options for some devices. And then we will look at the options around funding, HSE and other funding. So choosing a device, there's 4 key things to consider. Firstly, the seizure type, whether it's tonic-clonic or some other detectable seizure type. The person, are they living alone? What age is the person? Really, we ask that in relation to specifically children and young babies, because not all devices will suit children or young babies. How their seizures present is often quite different, and their muscle development is such that maybe certain devices wouldn't pick up seizures that they would in an older child or adult. So seizure pattern and control, those are important aspects as well that might lead somebody to wonder about getting a device. But really, there's no hard and fast rule about it. People who have frequent seizures, might be considering the safety aspect of that. But if somebody has infrequent seizures, or even if they're well controlled, they may still, opt to have some kind of, detection in place as a backup for them. It's a personal choice. If there's sensory issues, that might arise with certain groups of people as to whether they can actually tolerate wearing an alarm like a watch device or some other wearable device. And that's a problem if you're looking for detection outside the home, because really the options are wearables in those situations. Also, to consider the devices, they're not all the same. No one device does everything. A bed sensor will detect in bed, but a separate wearable is needed if you're looking for detection during waking and daytime. What's the type of support, again, that somebody might need when they have a seizure? What do they need the device to do? Do they need it to alert outside the home, dial out, and who can respond? And again, is the monitoring service needed? These are questions to consider. So the types of devices and services, firstly, I suppose the ones many people might be familiar with, the more the older and they're still very much used types would be the bed sensors. They're probably the ones that are around a long time now and have a good track record. So the main types would be the alert and companion and guardian range, MFIT, MedPage range, and EpiCare 3000 are used with babies and young children. There's also a full-sized bed sensor to go under a mattress that's called Air Alert. Then there's portable alarms and sleep sensors and camera type detection. The camera one is called SAMI. There's also the Companion Mini Pro, which is a portable version of one of the bed sensors up above. And then EpiView is live monitoring from the UK. That's actually something that a person can avail of, but it is a subscription service. Wearables then are the watches like Embrace, EpiCare, and Nightwatch. I'm going to discuss those in more detail. Pulse sensors for people who might have changes in heart rate, which is some people with epilepsy, but it isn't everybody. And then an EEG based sensor, which is EpiHunter. So this is just a list of products and the type of seizure that they detect and price ranges. So I won't go through that in detail because I'm going to go through them separately on their own slides, but this will be in the information that we will send out to you. Okay. And the supplier information as well. So for bed sensors, we're looking at the companion guardian ranges, and they detect tonic-clonic seizures with movement and some focal seizures with movement or with urine, saliva, breathing sounds, heart rate and vomit. And they will radio page a carer or dial an alarm and send a text. So that's just some images there of those particular devices, the 3 devices there. The alert, the epilepsy bedside companion, and the guardian. And then the other bed sensors, the MFIT is used with all ages for tonic-clonic seizures, and it costs for around €500 upwards. MedPage is suitable for babies and young children for tonic-clonic sleep seizures, and it costs from 224 sterling because it's supplied from the UK. So where I have UK suppliers, it'll be in sterling, and if it's US suppliers, it'll be in dollars. So if they're based here, it'll be in euro. Epicare 3000 is suitable for babies and children under 10 years, and it ranges from 1150 to €1300. And the Air Alert mattress is detects convulsive seizures. It's from €600. So that's the med page there on your left and the Epicare there on your right. And here you have the Air Alert on your left and the MFIT on your right. Okay. So the camera monitor, the SAMI, is a sleep activity monitor. So it records abnormal movements in sleep, and it records, marks for review, and alerts with sound. It works only with Apple devices. Those would be extra to purchase. Some people have their own, obviously, and then they can use them with their own Apple devices. So it can be used alongside other detection devices because it's camera based. And in sterling, it's from 420 for the camera by itself, up to 1120 if you need the whole kit, the camera and the Apple devices. Pulse sensors. The Pulse Companion is an armband device for heart rate changes with seizures in sleep, and it's approximately €600. So moving on then to the watches, the Embrace 2 is one that maybe a lot of you might have heard about or inquired about. It's suitable for age 6+. There's 4 sensors on it, and it sends data to a phone via Bluetooth. The Embrace 2 has a longer battery life than Embrace 1. And it's a medical device in the EU. Currently, it's for $249 for the unit itself, the watch itself, and then it's a monthly subscription plan for the app, which starts at $990 per month. And there is a free trial for 30 days. It's for tonic-clonic seizures only, and you don't need a prescription outside the US. Okay, and then there's the Epicare Free and Epicare Mobile. They're for 10 years plus. Seizures with movement, tonic-clonic again, suitable for age 10 upwards. There's a range of alert options, and it's worn on the wrist. It costs from €1,400, and again, it's a medical device class 1. Night watch is a little different to the other watches in that this is only worn in bed. So it's only for sleep detection, whereas Embrace and Epicare can be worn in sleep and in waking. But with Night Watch, the sensors monitor heart rhythm and movements. It costs approximately €1,570. The range is 10 to 20 meters indoors. And it's for tonic-clonic, tonic, clustered myoclonic, and motor seizures. So it has a wider range of detection capability beyond tonic-clonic. Okay, although it's more effective for tonic-clonic than for the others. And it's a class 1 medical device as well. EpiHunter, this is for absences. It's an EEG headset paired with a smartphone. It's a frontal EEG. It will auto-record a video for 30 seconds prior to the seizure. So it detects signals, records, and logs absences. It costs €55 to €59 per month, and that's on a rental or loan basis only. Don't buy the actual device. Has a built-in seizure diary and a web portal to upload data. And remote hyperventilation tests can be done. Those are to induce absences so that they can be assessed, and it's a medical device class 1 as well. So some issues to consider are really detection rates. Are seizures reliably detected by these devices? How soon into the seizure is detection possible? Are there false detection rates? Could there be missed seizures? We know that irrespective of devices, that there are missed seizures in a lot of cases. There's underreporting of seizures and undetected seizures happening for people. So this is perhaps another reason why people might be considering detection devices. And we need to look at what the data says in regard to that, and it's perhaps less clear as regards the role in SUDEP prevention. But again, it's from the safety perspective, this is something to be considered. So looking at the evidence, there was a study done which reviewed all the marketed devices at the time, and it stated that for a device to be acceptable in terms of its detection rate overall, that it would need to be at the 90% plus 90% minimum detection level, and that false alarms would need to be reduced, so that 90% was the benchmark in this study that they said was required for a device to be acceptable. Almost all the detection data is for tonic-clonic seizures, and there are gaps in relation to focal onset seizures. That is still the case, if they don't have major movement, but there are still studies ongoing into that, and more research into other types of devices. Most of the evidence seems to be from hospital settings rather than real world everyday settings in the home. And that's just some further information on that particular study. So just to summarize, in relation to the detection rates, we heard from that study that 90% was what was considered to be acceptable in terms of detection rate. And so looking at the devices that met that particular criterion, the highest detection rates have been found for the Embrace, the EpiCare, the EpiHunter, and the Night Watch in relation to the tonic-clonic seizures. Now, when it comes to apps, these are apps that can be downloaded onto smartwatches, the likes of the Apple Watch, the Samsung Watch, and so on. We have a range of them listed here. The apps would include Seize Alarm, Soteria, Neoton, BioAlert, EpiWatch, Smartwatch Inspire, My Magic Watch, and Cesario. And they work with iPhones, Apple Watches, various smartwatches, and Android watches as well. And a Samsung Watch for some of them. We have very little by way of data and feedback on most of those, so I'm not able to give you the same level of information about those, because there just hasn't been enough research into all of those compared to the other types of devices. Okay, but if you have a smartwatch that is compatible with one of those apps, then certainly that's something worth exploring. And by all means, let us know any feedback that you have in relation to it. Be very interested to hear. Just in regard to assessment and feedback, if a person has access to an occupational therapist, then they could be in a position to discuss the devices with them. The technical staff from the alarm companies can also discuss a person's detection needs with them. Some of the companies will do their own assessments as well, based on the information that the person gives. In Epilepsy Ireland, I suppose we get asked a lot about user feedback, and we talk to our colleagues in other patient organisations in other countries, and we're all finding the same thing, that really user feedback and testimony on alarms and apps is actually very low. So we do ask people, if you can, to give us even, the smallest amount of feedback, just how you found an alarm or an app or any device. It just helps inform, the information that we can pass on to people as well. So in terms of possible funding routes, well, a person or their family can apply for funding approval to the local HSE if they can get a quote for an alarm and a medical letter outlining the need on safety grounds. And packages do vary in cost. As I said earlier, they're somewhere between 200 at the lowest end and above 1,700 at the higher end, and there can be monthly or annual monitoring charges which are extra, and those may not be funded. It might be once-off capital cost for the actual device itself, but costs may be allowable on health expenses for tax relief purposes. Some companies do offer free trials, so it's worth looking into those. And there may be rental options with some, and you would have to be prepared for some of them having the subscription services as well for the apps. The Hospital Saturday Fund may give grants to some individuals. Also, the Department of Social Protection, they have granted exceptional needs payments in some cases to cover the costs of alarms. And also family carers and some local charities, local needs charities as well, have also, been able to provide funding. It's all really done on a case-by-case basis, I would say, on an individualized basis, both with the HSE and all of the other potential funders as well. So just for further directions in relation to seizure detection, there's a device was developed known as Speak, also known as Seizure Link, which is a surface EMG, which is really for detecting muscle changes. It's wearable on the biceps for tonic-clonic seizures, and it can actually detect the difference between a tonic-clonic and a non-epileptic seizure. So that has a particular value for somebody who might have either both of those presentations or be under evaluation for those. There's also the Neureka epilepsy sleep monitor, which it's from the US, and it's $499 plus a subscription, suitable from age 5. It can be worn on the finger. It's really for health metrics in sleep, and they're not distributed here yet, these devices, but it's possible that will change, because of one of the companies in the UK is is taking on, has gone into some kind of arrangement with one of the companies here. So I think we'll probably hear more about those in time. So for the future, we're looking at seizure prediction really is where it's going to be. And we're at I suppose at an exciting juncture in relation to moving from seizure detection to seizure prediction, which is, you know, potentially going to be a game changer in regard to how people monitor seizures. So there's a device called MJN Ceres from Spain. It's an earpiece device that sends out a 1 to 3 minute warning and to say that the risk of a seizure is high. It detects tonic-clonic, tonic and atonic seizures. So again, it has a broader range than just tonic-clonic. According to the company data, it has 96% sensitivity. The cost is 1,750 and it has medical device status as well. There's UK trials ongoing, and it's not available here yet, but hopefully when the trials are complete, and we don't have a date at this point, but it's certainly an interesting space to watch, because anything that will give prediction will be a bonus on top of detection, and it will be suitable for age 12 plus. The other device that's in development is called Epinus from Israel, and that's also a wearable EEG based device, which uses machine learning algorithms, and it can give up to an hour of warning, apparently, and with 95 to 97% accuracy. Again, that's at the prototype stage, so it isn't available at this point, but some exciting and interesting developments here that could potentially yield real benefit for people with epilepsy. So this is just the references for the research that was quoted earlier in relation to the comparable data on the seizure detection devices, just two studies there that were quoted.
So there was one question kind of specifically around the night watch, and I'm not sure if we'll have the answer to this, but does the night watch alert through the app or an alarm on the wearable itself? Do you know?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
It's just with regard to the night watch device.
Yeah.
Does it alert through the app, or is it an alarm on the actual wearable itself?
So there's an actual base unit that it communicates with, and so the device detects the seizure, relays the data to the base unit, and then it sends out the alert that way. So
okay, brilliant, thank you. Good question in here about specifically for toddlers and young children, asking if there are any wearable devices that are suitable for toddlers.
Not for toddlers. I think the youngest age for anything wearable is 4.
Is 4, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just
for toddlers, really, you're looking at for the most part, it's bed sensors, the 3 bed sensors that were mentioned.
Okay.
The problem with wearables in very young children, as I mentioned, is the maturity of their muscles and the way many of these wearables work, that they're trying to detect changes in either muscle movements, or in, detecting vigorous movement with an accelerometer, but maybe, for very young children, because of their age and development, it may not actually detect, or they may not be able to pick up those
Okay,
movements at that young age just yet. I mean, in time,
that may
hopefully.
change.
Hopefully.
Just had a comment in here with regard just to someone's feedback, which it could be useful on the seize alarm on the Apple Watch. And if it's okay, I'll just read it out. Just it might be useful. So this person was just given their feedback that the seize alarm being used on the Apple Watch did initially seem to be oversensitive, and it was going off quite a bit. They adjusted the sensitivity, but then it was actually missing seizures. So it might be useful, they feel, for tonic-clonic seizures only, and like many devices, doesn't cover all seizure types. And the Apple Watch itself, they found useful for monitoring heart rate and linking that to seizure activity, but overall didn't feel it was quite useful enough. And someone else had just mentioned their feedback on the My Medic watch. And again, I suppose we're always mindful that, you know, people might have different experiences on devices, but there was some issues around the download and setup of that particular product on the phone and the watch, and it did crash sometimes as well. So I suppose just something for people to keep in mind as well when they're considering the type of device they might go for.
And this is very useful feedback, you know, that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Absolutely,
To hear
absolutely.
from people, you know, of the problems they have, as well as what has worked well.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And Geraldine, I know you had spoken about funding possibilities, and just someone had asked a good question, was asking, are they covered for medical card patients?
Again, it's not necessarily the case that they're provided on the medical card. The person would still have to apply to the HSE to have that covered. You know, they're not necessarily dispensed on the medical card in that way, but the person can still apply to the HSE to have their application considered on medical grounds.
Okay, very good.
And that would be evaluated that way. Yeah.
Okay. And just a comment or question, do we have an idea as to when, and I hope I'm saying this properly, the MJN SERAS may be available, or how the UK trials are going?
Well, I was just speaking to somebody in relation to that just a few weeks ago, and we had thought that it would be next year that it would be here. At this point, it's whenever the trials finish, and I don't have an end date for that because I was trying to find that out. At the moment, I don't have a specific date, but I mean, it is available in the UK, but the company that distributes it in the UK can't distribute outside the UK. So,
Okay.
you know, so otherwise, it's a Spanish company, but so again, we don't have a specific date. The trials are ongoing, but you know, there is hope that it would be sooner rather than later.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Mm.
And Geraldine, where could people find out more about the Hospital Saturday Fund?
Well, if you go onto their website, Hospital Saturday Fund website, and there's a section on it where it gives information about funding for individuals.
Brilliant, thank you. Just ask, are you aware of any occupational therapists with specific skill in the area, in either public or private sector?
Not specifically, but really, you know, occupational therapists in general, would be dealing with assessing people for equipment and so on. I couldn't say what their experience or knowledge of epilepsy related devices would necessarily be. But we do get queries from OTs as well, looking for information. So it may just arise, you know, in relation to a particular client that they're dealing with. But again, I couldn't say that there's particular OTs, that people need to go to.
Sure.
But any OT would have the training and the skills and be qualified to, to assess a person, and try to match them with a device or an alarm.
Great.
Or make a recommendation.
The messages or the questions are coming in thick and fast now, so
Okay.
I'm going to try and get through a few more. Again, another one here, just clarifying on the Epi Hunter. Is this only for sleep monitoring, or is there a wearable for absence and partial seizures? And I think that one is a wearable, isn't it, Geraldine?
It's a wearable. It's like a headband that's worn around the front across the forehead, and actually it's more likely to be used during daytime.
Okay, more so daytime.
Yeah. And for absences.
Okay. I'm just going to try and get a quick one in there. Someone is asking just how to apply for a free trial with Embrace. I'm assuming that would be directly through the company themselves.
Yes. Embrace in the US.
Embrace in the US, and that's all on their website as well.
It is. Okay. And just to explain, there is a company distributing Embrace in the UK. It's the same company as has the MJ and Ceras, and they can't distribute outside of the UK. They can only distribute within the UK. So everybody else outside of the UK needs to deal with Embrace or Empatica in the US.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Geraldine. Just a comment again that's useful. So someone has just messaged in, and they have found that using a baby monitor to pick up sound and a Tapo smart camera to detect movement is useful for them in monitoring nighttime seizures for their 10-year-old son who has a mix of seizures. So it's good to hear other approaches and what works for people as well. Just to see, so yeah, someone else using the Seize alarm, and as also mentioned that there were a lot of false alarms, and the battery can go down quite quickly. So just another comment on that. Then there is just one or two kind of specific questions, and I don't know that we may be able to answer them fully, but you might be able to direct people, Geraldine. One here, their young person has focal seizures at night with movement, and they're wondering which device that you feel might be suitable for them. And I know this person recognizes we can't give a definitive answer. It's more kind of generally speaking.
What age group?
That I don't know, I'm afraid.
So if it's an older child, then there would be one of the bed sensors supplied by Tunstall that could potentially, detect motor movement, in addition to, say, tonic-clonic. So some focal seizures could be detected
with that particular device.
Yeah. So they'd need to speak to the company, really.
The supplier,
you'd need to speak to the supplier and explain what the features are, so that they can figure out then, have they got an epilepsy related device that can detect those features of the seizures, or is it some other device that they have, which wouldn't necessarily be an epilepsy specific device, but it might do, it might perform the function of, for instance, if somebody has a lot of if somebody has a lot of saliva during a seizure, it's possible to detect that, and that might be, for some people, the only sign. But that is something that might be, also detected separately of seizures, if you see what I mean, so detecting moisture, detecting Other features like urine, breathing changes and so on. Those can be features of other alarms as well. So
Okay.
there can be maybe a combination in some instances of looking at what is the presenting seizure
Features, yeah.
profile. Yeah, the features that can be detected. So in this case, if it's focal with motor, if the motor symptoms, if the movement is significant enough, then potentially that might be detectable
Okay.
with one of the bed sensors, with one of the
Thank you.
companion bed sensors.
Thanks, Geraldine. I'm just going to, there's two short comments and maybe one more question if we have time for that. Tell me if we're running over time. Just someone giving feedback on the SAMI monitor, finding it very good. Sorry, just get to that comment there. It keeps moving up. Someone using the SAMI monitor, find it brilliant, love the recording option, and then you can go back and review movement and so on. Another person again saying that they find the baby monitor very successful and has used it for a very long time. So that is useful. And there's just one other question that came in earlier that I just don't want to miss, if that's okay. I'm just going to go back. So maybe, what is the best advice for 21-year-old with daily seizure activity, also has learning disability, ASD and ADHD, and doesn't know or can't tell when a seizure is going to happen, and would also have to use a wheelchair for fear of falls. So there's quite a lot happening there. Just if you'd any advice, Geraldine, around that.
Well, really, it starts with what is the seizure that's happening daily? What seizure is it that you're seeking to detect? So if they're tonic-clonic seizures that are happening daily, then because if it's during the day, then you're looking at a wearable device.
Okay.
You're looking at, say, the EpiCare or the Embrace, or some other watch with an app that would detect tonic-clonic seizures. So you're looking at something wearable.
Okay, that might be an option.
Yeah.
Just someone had a comment there that they had applied for funding for support for a device and were on a medical card, and unfortunately it was turned down. So just again, I suppose that was one person's experience. So be mindful of that. A couple of people just mentioned that they came on late, and just for those who did or weren't able to get on for various reasons, there will be a recording available in the coming weeks of tonight's session. So just if I've missed, just checking I haven't missed anything there. Someone again comment on the Embrace, and they feel that it could be the backbone in the development and precision of these devices. So yeah, that is.
Can I just say, Mary, just to follow on from the earlier query you had about the young person with the daily seizures who was needing to use a wheelchair. If it isn't tonic-clonic seizures, if it's some other kind of seizures, then the options are more limited, because the wearables don't really extend to anything beyond tonic-clonic seizures, unless it's absences. So that would still be a wearable in that setting. But if it's tonic-clonic, then there's those options. But I'm not sure what seizures are happening.
I know what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna give it one last minute, and so someone has asked, my son is 11 and had previously had a history of having tonic-clonic seizures, but since starting medication is no longer having tonic-clonic seizures, but does have focal seizures during sleep, and just wondering if you could recommend any devices over the other for this type of seizure. So I know you did say most devices are geared towards the tonic-clonic seizure, But just if you
Well,
had
well, they are, and it depends again on what he's 11, so yeah, again, but as I mentioned earlier, there is one of the bed sensors that might detect focal seizures with movement. If there isn't movement, there won't be anything for the bed sensor to detect, unless there's movement, or maybe one of the other features that I mentioned. So, such as the saliva and breathing changes, or any of those. And there can be add-ons to a bed sensor in terms of detection, so they will basically, the companies will ask for a detailed description of what happens during a seizure, what features there are, so that they can identify what they can detect from that. But if there's movement, if there's vigorous enough movement, then a bed sensor might pick that up. If there isn't vigorous movement, then you'd have to find some other clinical feature that would actually lend itself to being detected. So but it's useful still to talk to the companies, the ones that supply the bed sensors. We have them all listed in our leaflet, but you're looking at Tunstall or Independent Healthcare or a Task or SBC, any of those. Talk to them about what your detection needs are, and
Thanks,
so that
Geraldine.
they can discuss with you what they can offer, or what range of equipment they have, and what that can do and detect.